Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm joined today by Shaun Taylor. Shaun is someone I've known for quite a long time now. And I'm trying to think how to describe you, Shaun, without aging me. So people like Shaun, we used to call company doctors. What that meant was that the CEO would have someone, the company doctor, that they'd always throw into a situation that needed something a little bit different or needed a bit of discovery first, or they weren't quite sure what the problem was. Basically, it allowed the CEO to react to their gut feeling, which was, there's a problem here, and then they throw in this person, just go and fix it. It doesn't matter whether it's out of their functional area, out of their industry area, it didn't really matter. And Shaun's background is a lot like that. And then he's been delivering independent consultancy, interim management type work for companies, private companies, listed companies, high net worth individuals, a broad range. But Shaun, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good to talk to you, Mark. And thanks for inviting me to this. I've been around the industry kind of 25, 30 years in varying roles, from Chief Information Officer, Chief Operating Officer, through to Chief Transformation Officer. And I've done a couple of CEO roles for small startups, where getting them through an incubator process. So I've kind of deliberately worked across telco, financial services, manufacturing, a range of different industries, including professional services and financial services, because I wanted to draw in experience from a range of different industries, so I could do what Lou Gester did for IBM, where the guy from biscuits came into IBM and transformed them into something which is a world powerhouse still today. That outside-in thinking, where you're unencumbered by the tradition of how you do things in a particular sector, has a powerful way of working. And I learned that very early on in my career, and I've kept that thing going throughout it.
Yeah, to be honest, Shaun, I'm with you. I mean, my background is I was on a rotational scheme, and the rotational scheme, I spent time in every single functional area of that business. And then when a problem occurred within that business, very often I'd be part of that conversation because I had empathy with other parts of the organization. So I'd spent time in there, and we could always fix problems quite quickly because I understood the business from a whole. And that's where you're coming from, isn't it? That's your background.
Absolutely. And taking that back into an example, I mean, back in 2000, I inherited a program to do the Coca-Cola Enterprises year 2000. I walked into something which we were about to go into European end-to-end testing for, and I quickly realized we were nowhere near ready for it. We'd been storing up problems for ourselves. We'd been doing change controls without authority. We'd not been telling the client us how far behind plan we were. And I had a meeting with their group CIO, who actually came from HR. So they had a rotational program at that point where different leaders came into different roles from different parts of the business. And he didn't understand technology, but I was able to translate the problems into a way which was a set of business problems that he could understand. In the end, we ended up putting together a recovery program that we both signed up to, and we ended up recovering all of the change control work we've done, which hadn't been paid, which hadn't been authorized, which was about $250,000. And then we actually nailed the delivery and kept to the revised plan. But what really worked for him was that it was presented in language he could then translate and go and sell internally. It wasn't overly complex. He understood it.
See, that's the thing, isn't it? Once you're in a position where you understand the business holistically, you know what words to use and how to make it more straightforward, more simplistic, and easy language to understand, because you're not trying to protect your domain, or you're not trying to protect your functional area. What you're doing is you're trying to be quite open and trying to get a language that everyone understands.
It's taking the fear factor out. And, if you're, there are certain trigger words. I mean, if one of the words I hate is when someone comes up to me and says, why have you done that? Because, if you go back to when you were a child, when your parents said, why have you done that? It's normally because you've just done something bloody stupid. So, when you say that in the business context, people naturally think, oh, what have I done wrong, and go into a defensive mode. You need to do these things in a way where you build relationships, you build rapport, build trust, and don't make the other person feel that actually they've done something wrong, or they're being considered to be part of the problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the empathy thing is a thing that's massively underrated, undervalued across businesses. But the best way that I've seen leaders create empathy or be empathetic is that they've understood all the functional areas of the business, and therefore, when they're speaking to the person, using the terms and the language that they understand, that they're creating this natural empathy.
Exactly.
But let's go on to the question that we wanted to talk about in the podcast, which is around value creation. So, how does someone like you create value or support the CEO to create value in their business?
And that comes down to the CEO having a strategy, having a plan, and then the CTRO supporting the CEO in hand in glove in terms of translating that into a set of actionable initiatives. McKinsey have the term house of transformation. You build that house of transformation, and you identify the initiatives. You go through which, what impacts business as usual. What is a transformation point? What is a growth point? You actually have and in fact, I think it's a dual approach. It's a value creation plan and a growth plan, and the two are different. The value creation plan is more often than not about actually how you get operational efficiency, actually how you reduce operational costs, how you reprofile the workforce, how you implement a global ERP platform and perhaps match that with a shared service center in India or Europe or somewhere like that. But then you've got the growth plan, which is all about the revenue piece, and how do you make sure that your product roadmap is coherent? How do you make sure that you're resonating with what your customer needs? How are you making sure that you're not over discounting your renewal points? So how do you enable that growth plan in parallel to actually enabling the value creation program?
Yeah, and just expand out what CTRO is. What does that mean?
The Chief Transformation Officer is the person who, and McKinsey have got a lovely way of describing this. It's the role that is accountable for nothing, but responsible for everything. So the principal role of the Transformation Office is that control tower. It is there to make sure that it's a translation layer between the CEO and strategy, and then to make sure that you've got that relentless performance. So each of the functional areas own their transformation themes and strands. The role of the Transformation Office is performance, and to hold people to account for that performance. And typically you do that through high tempo, fast paced, execution focused performance meetings on a regular basis to drive down effective performance, making sure that people are committed to what they're doing, making sure that you take the confusion out, making sure you've got the right communication and education, and making sure you've got the right sequencing and timing. There's often a rush to get people out of the door while you're profiling into a shared service center. People forget you create a vacuum. If you're rushing people out of the door, you're not standing up the new capability. You're not educating the business into what they have to do in the context of the new shared service center. Everything falls down in the middle. And, for example, your suppliers stop getting paid. If you're not able to actually work out where the new account payable processes actually operate, where the invoices have to go to, and how they're processed, then how they're authorized, you suddenly have a problem with your vendors. So you've got to be really careful in actually how you choreograph this to make sure that everything lands correctly. And that's part of the role of the Transformation Office, to make sure that that coordination, that thinking is done to make sure that end-to-end piece actually is very effective. Sorry, my monitor is about to turn itself off.
Mine does that too.
Yeah.
It's eco-friendly though.
So the role of the Transformation Officer is to actually bring all this together. And that's why I like that description, is that he's responsible for nothing but accountable for everything, because it's about actually how these deliverables drop, how they're measured, how effective they are, and actually how they crystallize the results is where the skill is.
Okay, great. And what about communication? You know, if you're delivering value creation with the CEO, you've got to be in constant communication with the CEO and with the board. Like, how do you set those communication parameters? How do you keep them well informed? How do you work together on that?
So there's different ways of doing it. I mean, I've done it where we've actually had, I've reported into the board on a monthly basis. I've actually had a board subcommittee on a monthly basis, and then quarterly transformation boards. And I've done it where we've simply just had a regular monthly transformation board. So depends on the organization and the tempo and rigor the business wants to operate against.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest challenge is not so much the internal governance, it's the internal communication. Because the CEO is the front of house for the transformation. And when you're setting the tone for that transformation, the CEO needs to set that tone. So he has to do the communication, he has to do the articulation. I'm a great believer in using infographics, because if you can encapsulate what you're doing into a single graphic and then talk against that graphic and engage your audience against that graphic, they can understand what's in it for me. How does it affect me as an individual?
Yeah.
And then they can start engaging against it. You can start addressing the fear factor and get people on the journey with you. If you don't do that, you create vacuums. And a vacuum in transformation is horrible, because people always draw the worst case scenarios, and you get unnecessary resistance, and your change teams are bumping up against stuff that they shouldn't do, which is ineffective. And then the other challenge is then how you then get the ELT members, so the CEO's direct reports, to live that same vision and to communicate that same message, because there has to be one voice, one message, one tone, and that comes from the CEO and is pushed down. It's a bit like what they used to call pyramid briefings back in the day. Is that consistency of message? You stay the same principal key theme, and then you expand on as your function to give it context around your function and your people.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think what we've seen in the past with transformation, we've seen good and bad, of course. We've been doing this a long time now. And I remember one particular instance. It was a big company. It's a company that in the UK you'd recognize, a couple of billion turnover. And the chief exec is a great chief exec. He's moved on now. I think he's even retired. Great chief exec, and all with the best intentions, good values, good ethics, good man, really. And he was, at the forefront of the transformation, being a great sponsor, being a great leader. And they had these three things that they needed to do within the transformation that's communicated really effectively. And about 6-7 months in, something big came from, I think it was an economic change or a policy change where the business needed to react to it. So the chief exec decided that instead of 3 great things that they're going to be delivering on the transformation, they were going to deliver 4 great things. And I always remember the head of program communications, dedicated role, piggybacking onto existing channels. She had an absolute fighting match with the CEO, not publicly, but a fighting match with the CEO, and ensured that the program stayed with 3 great things they're changing, but they still changed the 4th thing, but didn't change the whole tone of the transformation. I think what that taught me is that once you've set your communication agenda, you've set your tone, you've set what you're going to change, don't change that, because that will create havoc. And it was a brilliant example of having a really strong head of communications.
Oh, 100% agree. You can pivot. You just need to be careful how you pivot, and then how you communicate the pivot, or if you communicate it, because if it's a silent change, you can stay silent on it.
Yeah, that's what they decided to do, and it was effective. It worked.
Yep. Yeah. It's a question of having that emotional intelligence of working out that how you stay in your core message, how you don't dilute the benefit, but you're still able to pivot and achieve all your objectives.
Yeah, yeah, very true. I think the comment afterwards from the CEO was, "I'm really glad that we hired the interim head of change comms for transformation. That was someone that was so experienced, because I think he was saying someone with less experience might not have challenged me to the extent that that person did.
Yeah.
But it worked, and it saved the transformation program." And it was a good result, a really good result. I always remember.
Well, I always say, you're only as good as the team you have, and good people are expensive. If you go cheap on people, you run risk. And if you look at a lot of the transformation failures, they come down to two factors. One is that you try to do it without supplementing the team. So you haven't built what I call a home team advantage. So the gaps in your organization, you actually haven't actively fulfilled. And if you're using an SI or a consulting firm, you need a home team advantage, because you need competency within your team to actually deal with the SI. And if you don't do that, it's a false saving. If you need 4 roles filled in your team to manage an SI on a significant ERP implementation, if that every month that's delayed because you've delayed it by actually not having the ability to service them, there's an amplification of those 4 roles, because the SI's got 50 or 60 or 70. You haven't hired 4, but you're paying the overrun for the 50, 60 or 70. So it's a false saving.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side of it where, there's always gaps in what you need in your internal team. If you use the external team to actually educate and leave an enduring memory back of how you've done something, that's not just the cost, that's an investment in your existing team, because interims have a lot of experience, and they impart knowledge and they build capability and competency within the retained teams as well. So you can actually next time rely on people because you've conditioned them through these transformation points.
Yeah, I think when we've seen transformation done really well, there's always a large element of knowledge transfer, and that's stipulated right from the beginning. In fact, we write it into the objectives for some of the interim managers to make sure that it's something that's measurable. And I'm not sure a lot of agencies do that. I think what they'll do is just supply a person and hope that that happens. I think for us, when we're dealing with a client and we're dealing with something like transformation, we remember they don't have people like you on the books anymore. No one can afford that anymore. Those days are gone. But when you're bringing in someone in, they've got to have a lasting impact. I think that's so important.
Oh, completely. Yeah. And if you don't build that retained memory, there's another benefit as well. There's another benefit, which is that you're the guy who got them through success, but also help the business condition and manage the change point and be ready for the next one. So the business always remembers that person who left that happy smile on their face.
Yeah.
And and it's the old showbiz energy, isn't it? Leave them smiling.
Yeah, agreed. And also, let's not forget the human side, because if the communication's right and if the knowledge transfer is right, then what you're doing is you're really empowering those individuals, those employees. And in return, they're going to be happier at work. They're going to do a better job at work. So let's not forget the human side of this as well, because transformation is frightening for a lot of people.
It is, but it's only frightening because there's a fear of communication. And going back many years, I did a program where we integrated the RAC into Norwich Union, and I had one chap who literally was raising grievance procedures about how his grievance procedures were being processed, and we just couldn't get he was a really great guy. He had some really key knowledge we needed in terms of some black box technology, which we had to reverse engineer. And in the end, I just took him out for a beer and said, look, what's really the problem here? And it turned out that the real issue was fear. He'd been with the company as an apprentice. He'd only ever worked for the company for 20 years. And what he was scared of was what's going to happen next. And no one had actually had that conversation with him about, actually good things can come next. You've got this skill set, you've got this ability. We can help you throughout placement and other schemes we've got going. But no one had taken the time, him as an individual, to lay his fears aside. And as soon as we did that, he opened up. We got what we needed, and he got a happy outcome.
Yeah, it's very true. I think when you remember the human side to it, there's always a way to get them to engage, and then I've seen that so many times. You mentioned in terms of performance. Now, when we're adding value, or when we're doing value creation, what we're doing is we're really looking at impact, aren't we? And we're looking at driving measurable impact. So tell me how the role of sort of OKRs and structural KPIs, tell me how they have an impact into value creation.
Yeah, and OKRs I think are wonderful. They actually give structure. They give you a common challenge. It enables you to translate your strategy into measurable objectives. You're able to then set those with clear targets at individual level, at functional level. You can prioritize them, but you then got rigor around measurement, and they overlay onto transformation extremely well. But then you've got also your structural KPIs, which I think are really critical, because transformation is about it's either about taking cost out or putting value in. So if you've got a cost transformation program going on, unless you can see that cost movement in the P&L, it's not a real saving. Now, at my time at Digicel,
I'm laughing. No one can see me. I agree with that completely.
Yeah. We took $128 million out of that business in 12 months. We took 35% of the headcount. We completely turned the operating model on its head. We removed the expats where people didn't believe removing the expats was possible because there wasn't the local talent. And we did that to structural KPIs. Every dollar we took out of that business was measured through structural KPIs with P&L movement. It went to board, it went to audit committee, it went to external audit, and every dollar we claimed was validated and saved. Now, a lot of people do cost transformation, and when you look at it, it's cost suppression. It's they are deferring travel, they're deferring hires. It's money that's going to wash back into the business. So you get a quarter-on-quarter saving, but what you don't get is an annualized saving with a recurring benefit. So there's a difference between cost avoidance and cost suppression and real cost transformation. The other problem with cost transformation also is that it's difficult. It's the one program that puts fear into the business and causes people to go into their shells, because they naturally button down because it's a storm they've got to weather. And you have to reprogram the business in order to get them to think about this differently, and to think about, this is about, not only how do we improve our operational performance, but we actually, in some cases, how do we improve our EBITDA debt ratio? Because, with the cost of money going up, it coming into recessionary pressures, we're talking about 0.75% reduction in growth forecast for the UK. We're looking at almost 4% inflation by the autumn. The stagflation, I think they're calling it now. So businesses will be thinking about actually how they tackle these problems, and the ones that come out of it the other end stronger will be those who have got the OKRs, got the structural KPIs, and are tackling the cost transformation in intelligent ways. Otherwise you're just it's a game of musical chairs. You can move without taking the chairs away, because your cost suppression it's not an effective strategy.
No, it's not. You reminded me of a story. I did this was over 10 years ago. A company you'd recognize. I think they're about 5 billion now. They were about 1 billion when we were working with them. And they were doing a program. And the program was cost reduction. It was cost reduction through supply chain. They've been through an acquisition, which we helped them do the integration, and they had a consultancy team in, and I watched the I can't remember if it's the program director or the head of finance or both. I can't quite remember. And they literally lost their shit with the excuse me for swearing, but with the consultancy, because they realized that all the work they'd done in the last 8 weeks or so and all the results that they were showing were savings tabled, not savings gained. And it was I'll never forget it. They were gone. The consultancy were gone because that was not the brief. And then we had to bring in some interim managers to try and action some of this stuff. But that shows you the difference, though.
Oh, completely. And and this is why the partnership between the CEO and the CTRO was so critical, because you've got to optimize without damaging scalability. Yes. You've got to be able to, make sure you protect EBITDA, because EBITDA is your future exit value. You've got to make sure that you're executing with efficiency, but in a way that actually doesn't trigger a workforce kind of disruption, because you've got to be really careful. And certainly in some instances where you've got unions and workers' councils, if you mismanage that, you've got real challenges.
Yeah, agreed. We see that fear a little bit from some of our American clients who have got divisions or operating companies across Europe into UK. Classically UK, France, Italy, bit more problematic. Spain, a little bit problematic too. But the Americans don't have this as much. So when they start coming over and they start acquiring businesses and wanting to integrate or deliver change management or deliver transformation across them, that's when we get a bit of a problem with the works councils.
And you've got to be really mindful of the hot buttons with the workers' councils. Data residency, is really key. Germany, the use of personal devices and that work social life balance is also another critical factor for them. So you've got to understand not just the workers' council issue, but the nuance of each workers' council in each country, and actually how they can impact your change management and your transformational outcome. And again, you've got to take them on your journey.
Yeah, we do a lot of global transformation. I think we're part of IXPA, so we've got offices in 29 countries. And very often the global players that we're dealing with come to us because we have partners in each of those countries that understand those different nuances. And that can help when we pull all that together. But global transformation programs, I think, have always been challenging. I think they're about to become more challenging. Because I think a lot of governments are looking at lots of different ways to collect tax and to collect revenue, and they're finding little areas of legislation and areas that they can capitalize on that can be a bit of a trap.
Well, and I agree, but there's a fixation or even obsession with payroll tax. And the challenge with that is that it creates bad behaviors and it creates an adverse impact, because if you look at what the UK have done in terms of IR35, single status worker parameters, you look at the new changes into payroll taxation from the last budget. All of those are building cases for you to do a couple of things. So, for example, if you've got a load of people under 25, actually, how do I reprofile them onto a workplace apprenticeship schemes, so I actually overcome some of my new payroll tax liability? How do I reprofile my current headcount, so actually I've got them in that demographic, so I actually have that benefit? How do I then further move up to nearshore and offshore locations rather than hire onshore? So the UK government is risks losing more than it's gaining by these policies, because if you erode the attractiveness of employing people within the UK, you're actually eroding the amount of margin that's taxable back in the UK, both from a payroll perspective and a gross margin perspective. So I just don't understand the policy. It's almost a policy to actually push roles offshore.
Well, it's funny. I mean, as a sort of head of group transformation or chief transformation officer, and working with the CEO, this is where a CTRO really comes in, because the CEO can't be expected to know all these things, and the CEO can't be expected to be interfacing with all their different reports to find out these things on the basis of delivering a successful transformation. You need this person in the middle, don't you, to sort of pull all this together.
It's that holistic view, and pulling the transformation strands from each of the functional initiatives and actually making those into a holistic plan that actually gets to the point where you've gone through that value creation, but you're then in that growth projection as well. So you've got to be able to protect the business from overcutting and reducing effectiveness into still being in a growth engine, but at a much more effective cost.
Yeah, agreed. I think there needs to be a big push for growth with a lot of companies. We forget that. Let's say that the UK is going to go through a recessionary period, and there's quite a few indicators at the moment. But let's say that is going to happen. Then what we always see when we come out of that recessionary period and into a growth period is there's always new winners.
Oh, it's the art of war. Out of chaos always comes opportunity. And it's about there's three pillars. There's the innovation pillar. So how do we actually have a product strategy? How do we have an operating model strategy that's better than our competitors, that gives us a market advantage and allows us to scale and grow? Then you've got your go-to-market strategies, your strategic growth planning, your pricing strategies. How are you tackling those? How are you going for a value-based pricing model? How are you pivoting from that SaaS type recurring revenue? How are you achieving that? And then you've got your shared services, you've got your in-market execution, you've got your underpinning ERP platforms, your talent management, etc. Is all part of your scaling. So as you're going through that innovation and growth phase, you've got that ability to scale the business in a way that actually is low cost. You've got that ability because your systems have got scalability, your people have got scalability, your locations have got scalability, but at margins you can afford.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I think if we go back to the original question, and it's what we were talking about, how does CTRO create value in partnership with the CEO? I think what I've gleaned from this conversation is it's that holistic view. It's that understanding of all the functional areas. It's understanding of their industry and other industries where you can pull best practice from. This is about having this holistic view at a board level type ability to communicate. I think
absolutely
that's the key.
And it can be a tripartite relationship, because quite often or not, the CEO actually has the growth agenda. So, it's the go-to-market strategy, it's the pricing, it's the customer, it's the product, it's the revenue piece with the CEO. And the CFO actually has the cost base, the headcount, etc. So quite often, you can have a program where you've got the growth engine and all of those growth decisions with the CEO. The CFO has all of the operating model and growth strategy, cost strategy, that operational scaling strategy, and with them. So it's often a three-way relationship, and actually keeping those in balance is quite critical.
Yeah, well, that's where the CTRO comes in, isn't it? It's
exactly
that, independent, in the middle. Shaun, thank you. I think you've given us some really good insight in terms of not only what background a CTO should have, but also how they think and how they deliver value in conjunction with the CEO. So thank you very much for your time, sir.
Cool. That's a great conversation, Mark.
Thanks a lot, Shaun. Bye.
Cheers. Bye for now.